Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here and 4Ks. And for this episode, I've got some fun stuff to talk about, some 4Ks and Blu-rays that I've gotten recently. And there are some neat things happening here. Let me just jump right in. I'm going to start with this one. This is the new 4K UHD release of the classic William Cameron Menzies film, Invaders from Mars from 1953, released by Ignite Films. And this is a pretty great stacked release. I have to say, I was impressed. It is a really neat movie that I think it's a little underrated at this time in terms of the sci-fi classic status I feel like it should have. So this release is welcome and will hopefully put the film on the radars of some folks that maybe weren't aware of it or haven't seen it in a long time. And it's such a lovely presentation. It's a brand new 4K restoration. It looks very nice. Definitely has a good amount of grain, but the color is very good. I think the tricky thing about the film is that it is balancing both a lower budget and the incorporation of stock footage, because there is an element of an army presence / attack wherein the filmmakers used some stock footage of tanks and some other military stuff to make the film feel bigger, and it works. But I think that, when you sort of put that under a 4K microscope, the grain tends to show a bit more, but I think it looks really, really good, and the color is lovely, and it's just a movie that is important and really interesting, especially for when it came out. The basic premise is that you have this kid played by young actor Jimmy Hunt, who's featured in the supplements on this disc. He witnesses a spaceship landing behind this hill near his house, and he and his dad go out to check on the whatever it is that he saw, and then his dad disappears, and the cops come to look for him, and then when he returns, suddenly he's weird. And we see that, he gets sucked under by this sand pit, which is another sort of big part of the film, is these people going up to this hill and stepping in this certain area of sand and getting pulled under and coming out as different. And what I think is really intriguing, too, is that, and Joe Dante makes a point of this in, one of the supplements, this is a film that has aliens taking people over, and it's maybe the first one that does that. This is 3 years before Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1956, and so it's pretty interesting, especially from the point of view that once these people are taken over, they become really aggressive and really grumpy, in an interesting way that that I actually felt bad for the kid in the movie. I feel bad for Jimmy Hunt when his dad comes back and is suddenly super grumpy with him, and he's asking him questions, and he ends up hitting the kid, and there's this look on Jimmy Hunt's face that's just what happened? That's not my dad. And, so then it becomes this whole story of him trying to go to the police station, and he ends up at least finding a woman there. I think she's the psychologist there that believes him, and they are able to get in touch with the army, and it becomes this whole initiative, to get the army to believe what's happening and get them going on the Martians. And another neat thing about the movie is it has there's lots, but the production design is great. And William Cameron Menzies was actually a production designer before he was a director, and it shows. He's got these really simple sets that just work really well, and there's something very haunting and dreamy about the whole film, and especially because it's from the point of view of a young child. I think that makes it differ and stand out from something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers too, which is very much from an adult point of view. But the actual Martians themselves, when we see them, they're giants. They're actually played by giants, like gentlemen that were like over 7 feet tall and wearing these, velour-looking green outfits with masks that have the eyes sort of closed up, like they're sealed closed, swollen almost, and they're very alarming to look at. And then there's a small brain-looking guy that looks like something that may have influenced like Mars Attacks, that's sort of controlling everything, But it's a fascinating film and one that I am a fan of. And, I think I was able to rewatch it a year or two ago and was kind of just like, I don't want to say like blown away, but I was very much impressed with the movie and kind of went, wow, I sort of didn't fully give this movie the credit that I feel like I should have. Like, it just really affected me, and there's something, again, dreamlike, haunting. It's got a quality about it that is really memorable. And so it's really nice to see it get a beautiful release from Ignite Films. Now, this one has some really nice extras on it. You can see here on the back, talking about the restoration and all the extras that we get here, which I'll go through here. So it's about an hour's worth of stuff, I think. And the disc itself seems to have been made by the same folks that do the Arrow Blu-rays, because the menu structure looks identical to an Arrow Blu-ray, which I love. I love seeing that sort of familiar branching, and so nicely designed, simple menu with a bunch of stuff. So let's talk about it. So first we have something called William Cameron Menzies, The Architect of Dreams. This is about 16 and a half minutes. Many of these features are co-produced and edited by friend of the show, Elijah Drenner. He's a great documentary filmmaker in his own right, and has working with a lot of these companies to do some really nice features. My point being is that they're well put together, well edited, and whenever he's in charge, they're just really solid. And so he's done, I want to say, like at least 3 of these pieces, including this one. Now this one is a new interview with James Curtis, who is the author of William Cameron Menzies' The Shape of Films to Come. And then there's a smaller section with Menzies' granddaughter, Pamela Lawson, I think her name is, Lawson. And Curtis is really great about the overview of Menzies, talking about him and his start as a production designer and art director, and going through his history leading up to even before getting into the film industry, and then working with Raoul Walsh, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, David O. Selznick. He famously did some work on Gone with the Wind, which is touched upon in this, and so forth, and how all this led Menzies to becoming a director. And towards the last 5 minutes of the interview, he brings in the granddaughter, and she offers her recollections of her grandfather, and that's really cool because you get to hear some of his sort of way that he was away from filmmaking. All right, so that's really nice. Then we have another one, featurette called Jimmy Hunt Saves the Planet, and this is a new interview with actor Jimmy Hunt. It's about 10 and a half minutes, also co-produced and edited by Elijah Drenner. Talks about his memories of being a child actor, working with some big stars like Robert Mitchum, etc. And then he moves into specific recollections of the experiences he had on Invaders from Mars, which he considers to be one of the highlights of his career. He was only 12 at the time, but he has some fun memories of the cast. He talks about the giants they used for the big Martians, the sets they used on the stage for filming, working with William Cameron Menzies. It's a really neat little interview, and he seems like a really warm and kind person, and it's nice to hear his recollections. So that's Jimmy Hunt Saves the Planet. And then we have my favorite feature on this, which is called Terror from Above, about 22 and a half minutes, also co-produced and edited by Elijah Drenner. This new featurette has interviews with acclaimed filmmakers Joe Dante, Mark Goldblatt, Robert Skotak, and John Landis, as well as preservationist Scott McQueen, who oversaw the restoration of this film and who comes up later in another feature. But yeah, I love this featurette. I could listen to these guys talk about movies for hours. They have lots to say about the film itself and growing up in the era when these films came out. They talk about the wonderful economy of the filmmaking of William Cameron Menzies and how his sets were simple but well designed and were reused and redressed. And they actually show some of the sets that I didn't notice in watching that were like, oh wow, he just redressed that hallway and it's now, went from a police station to a medical lab, and it's just really well done. And they talk about his shots looking like comic book panels, and that speaks to his sense of illustration, which was something that apparently was a big deal to him, the idea of storyboarding and laying out pictures of all the shots. And I think that's another reason the film really holds up, is it's just really well constructed and thought out. And anyway, so I love all these gentlemen, especially Mr. Dante. Always enjoy hearing their thoughts on these films and the general sense of paranoia in this era of the atomic age and, communism, which obviously this film could be seen as an allegory for. So that's great. My favorite thing there. And then this is really cool too. There's a featurette called Restoring the Invasion, which is about 7 minutes. And that's just Scott McQueen talking about the restoration, showing the before and after, explaining the specifics of the sources they used. It's pretty neat. I really dug it, just to kind of see how they did everything. Okay, so a few more things here. There's a TCM festival intro. It's about 7 minutes with filmmaker, writer John Sayles introducing the film at the Turner Classic Movie Festival in Hollywood. I love that he says, a movie that taught my generation not to trust our parents or any other authority figures. Very nice. And he recounts seeing it on TV as an 8-year-old and how it freaked him out. And it's a really neat little intro. I'm a huge John Sayles fan, and I love it when he speaks about films that I wouldn't think of him directing himself, if that makes sense. So anyway, I love that he's a big fan and gives a nice introduction. Then we have the European Observatory sequence, which is about 8 minutes and 50 seconds. And this apparently was something the foreign distributors requested some changes 6 months after the film had been released. They wanted a longer film and a new reality-based ending, not to spoil the ending exactly about what's happening there, but and a new director was brought in, and 3 of the actors, Jimmy Hunt and the guy who plays the scientist and the psychologist, are brought in this makeshift observatory set. And even the intro to the feature kind of acknowledges this is kind of shoddily put together and it doesn't really match the finished film. But it's interesting to have it here nonetheless. And then there's the European ending, where the actual ending of the film was replaced. I'm not going to talk about what the ending was and what it is, but it is about 2 minutes and 52 seconds showing this new ending, and they explain it. And then on an additional note, this is a timely thing, so if you're seeing this when it goes up and you're in the New York area, you may be able to attend these, but there are some screenings coming out in January of this year that are of this restoration, which would be pretty stunning to see in a theater if you were able. So there are screenings with accompanying lectures by restoration supervisor Scott McQueen at MoMA in New York on January 14th. That's, I want to say, Saturday. And then in Bedford Playhouse in New York on the 15th of January. And I would recommend checking out the MoMA and Bedford Playhouse websites if you are in the New York area and are interested in checking out these screenings. But it's nice that you have these accompanying screenings going along with this wonderful release. So anyway, a really great release from Ignite Films, and highly recommended. This is Invaders from Mars on 4K. Now, let's move on to some other stuff here. I have some new stuff from Cauldron Films. I've talked about Cauldron on the channel before. I'm a big fan of what they're doing. They are, of course, aligned with Diabolic DVD, who sponsors the podcast version of this show, and I'm a big fan of Diabolic and have been using them for years. This film is called Shanghai Joe, aka The Fighting Fists of Shanghai Joe, and this is a film that I saw for the first time, I want to say, about this time last year on another Blu-ray that does not look nearly as good as this Blu-ray does. And I really enjoyed it, but I enjoyed it even more in this second viewing. Now, this is a 2K restoration from the negative, and it looks really nice. It's a widescreen movie, and Cauldron did their usual wonderful job with it. It stars Chen Li as Shanghai Joe. It also has Klaus Kinski as Scalper Jack, and I'll get to that in a second. Opens with Shanghai Joe showing some kids on the streets of San Francisco how he can split open a coconut with his ball yo-yo. It's like a little wooden ball on a string. And you're like, oh, that might come in handy later. And it does. And the story really is about a guy who's come to California to seek his fortune, and he ends up going to Texas and just runs afoul of a lot of racist, unsavory idiots. And the movie is really structured in such a way as to set up him being harassed by these idiots and then them underestimating him and him sort of beating the crap out of them. And it is an incredibly enjoyable and cathartic watch. He just is incredibly acrobatic, and the martial arts are wonderful. It's part of a sort of East meets West movement in film, which, you know, I'll talk about in a second. There's actually a feature that touches on that. But yeah, this movie is just a blast and includes some really ingenuitive kills and injuries and a little bit of gore, and it is a blast, like a really good time. I really dug it. So the idea is that he just continues to, you know, beat the crap out of these people, and eventually he upsets the wrong rich one, and this guy hires a bunch of killers to come after Shanghai Joe. And so I want to say there's 3 or 4 of them. We get to see them come after him and fail, but they do, you know, give a good effort. Especially Klaus Kinski is rather scary as Scalper Jack, and that name definitely gives you a clue to the kind of character you're dealing with. So he's in a small role in the film, but it's pretty interesting. And then it ends with this really great climax with him fighting this sort of samurai dude in this red outfit, and there's a great story of where he was trained and this tattoo that you get, this, which is actually included there in the packaging here. Yeah, so it's just a super enjoyable film and a great restoration, and it's maybe one of my favorite Cauldron releases so far, honestly. Like, I just love the movie that much. Because the fighting is just really great, and it doesn't do that thing where the hero gets like put down for a long time or put in this really, like, he's mostly on the up and up for the whole movie, which I enjoy. I don't like sort of those obligatory side things they do in movies where the hero is waylaid and we have to kind of suffer through them being tortured or something like that. It doesn't really happen too much in this. Like, he really does fight strong for most of the movie. So anyway, this is it's got an English audio track and an Italian audio track and English subtitles for both. It has a commentary track with Mike Haas from the Spaghetti Western Digest. And this guy really knows his stuff. He gives nice background to the film and the actors. I also really appreciated all the other various spaghetti westerns and other films he mentions throughout the commentary, and I found myself often pausing and writing down titles, which is sort of an ideal scenario for me in terms of a commentary. So a track that gives me more stuff that I want to watch. So that was really solid. Then we have this thing called East Meets West, Italian style, and it's a visual essay by film historian Eric Zaldivar. And that is almost 20 minutes long, and also really great for the film recommendations. It shows sort of this history of the trend in cinema and how Shanghai Joe fits into it, as well as the films that followed it and the same cinema trends. Starts with, things like the Tony Anthony films, the Stranger films, and kind of progresses through this film and beyond. And it's really a great, again, overview of the genre, and I totally dug it. Again, lots of films to be recommended and gleaned from that. So really nice visual essay. And then there's something called Samurai Spirit, the interview with Katsutoshi Mikuria, who played Mikuja, which is the evil red-suited samurai fighter in the movie. It's about 9 minutes. He talks about how he was cast, his memories of the production. I mean, he's an older gentleman, so, your expectations shouldn't be too high for what he remembers, but it is a nice conversation and interesting to hear how he was hired, and he's really good in the movie, so it was kind of neat to see him included. But like I said, really nice restoration and some nice features for Shanghai Joe from Cauldron. And then Convoy Busters. This is continuing the Cauldron Films trend of Italian films, which I'm a big fan of. This is from 1978. I should have mentioned that Shanghai Joe is from 1973. And this one is pretty cool. It's got Maurizio Merli, who was brought in to kind of fill in for Franco Nero. He's got a very much a Franco Nero kind of look. And it says here, after brandishing his gun and badge too many times in front of powerful people, Maurizio Merli, and it lists some of his credits, is busted down from homicide to the emergency squad. Despite his demotion, he is not content with letting Rome's criminal element run rampant, and his violent nature soon finds him the target of both the press and the local mob. After a bloody attempt on his life, he is transferred to a quiet coastal town to run a local department, but never one to leave things alone. He quickly finds a dangerous smuggling ring, is using the cover of the sea and darkness to run their operations in his sleepy district. With its daring stunt work, violent shootouts, and split storyline featuring a Stelvio Cipriani score. Stelvio is great, with excellent performances from Olga Carlatos, Massimo Serrato, and Italian cinema stalwart Mima Palomara. Convoy Busters ranks highly among the 70s Italian crime genre. Cauldron Film presents Stelvio Massi's high-octane Polizia Cesci on Blu-ray, featuring a 2K restoration from the original negative, fully loaded with a new and archival extras. So, yes, very enjoyable Italian crime film. And it is neat to see that it is split into sort of two parts. The city part, which opens with like this intense woman's throat slit by the side of this canal investigation that spins into sort of a diamond smuggler thing in a smaller town. So it's kind of two movies, which I think is kind of interesting. But really fun, enjoyable action Italian craziness. And yeah, some nice features here. We have a 21-minute interview with Maurizio Merli's son, and it's neat and heartwarming to hear him talk about his son and how he didn't really know his father's films until after his death. he died at 49, so he died pretty young in 1989. The son was like 10, I think. So it's been obviously a journey to discover what his dad had done, and it's pretty neat. It's in Italian with English subtitles. The Masi Touch, an interview with Danilo Masi, the son of director Stelvio Masi, who worked with his dad as an assistant director. That's about 24 minutes, 19 seconds, also in Italian with English subtitles. Again, neat to hear a guy talking about his dad and working with his dad on this film and other films. They sound like a really, a nice working relationship, a guy who really cared about his son, and they have it's a good vibe, the whole thing, and it's interesting to hear the stories he has. And to that end, there's a Stelvio Masi video tribute by Danilo Masi. It's about 8 minutes and 24 seconds. It's a video he made to honor his father, featuring him sort of walking into a bedroom, opening up a drawer and taking out a light meter and some cigars, and then looking at a photo of his dad. And then there's a photo montage of him and his dad on sets, a few scenes of him and his dad's films and other stuff, all set to this very sweet piano music. It's a really moving little tribute. And then there is Maurizio Merli, A Lethal Hunter of Subtle Variation, an interview with tough guy film expert Mike Malloy. That's about 30 minutes. And this is really in-depth and pretty cool. It goes into Merli's career, starting with Violent Rome in 1975, which was sort of the follow-up to the success of the film High Crime, which had Franco Nero in it. And when they couldn't get him back, they brought in Merli, and Merli sort of had this hit, and that kicked off his career. And he talks about him doing a series of films where he played a cop who hated the criminal scum running wild on the Italian streets, but equally hated the legal system that failed to protect average citizens from that scum. And then Mike sort of goes through and focuses on some of the later, slightly different Merli films. Highway Racer from 1977, Seagulls Fly Low from 1978, Fearless Fuzz from 1978, and Convoy Busters from 78, as well as some others, Covert Action. But again, a great layout of films that you can discover if you enjoy what Mike has to say about them. And he's very good at, narrowing down the plots and summarizing the films in a way that is appealing. And he obviously knows Merli's career. He did an Italian crime documentary, which I do recommend checking out. It used to be on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure if it still is, but it may be on Tubi or something. A great documentary and a great primer for watching Italian films. But anyway, another great release from Cauldron, that is Convoy Busters. And I should mention that these have booklets with, actually this one doesn't. This has an insert and a poster, which is nice. And then Shanghai Joe, same thing, just an insert and a poster. But I should have mentioned at the top that the Invaders from Mars 4K has a really nice booklet with a restoration rundown, if you will, from Scott McQueen. It's a nice thick booklet included in that for collectors. And again, even the featurette on the restoration in Invaders from Mars was cool, so I dug that. Okay, got time for one more thing here. Let's talk about Baron Munchausen, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. This film from 1988. This is the new 4K release from Criterion. Of course, directed by Terry Gilliam of Time Bandits and Brazil and many others fame. And it is a delightful adventure film. The boundless imagination of Terry Gilliam yields a dazzling fantasy of epic proportions. Inspired by the extravagant exploits of the fabled Baron Munchausen, this spectacle, born of a famously turbulent production, follows the whimsical 18th century nobleman, played by John Neville, as he embarks on an outlandish quest that takes him from faraway lands to the moon, to the belly of a sea monster and beyond. meanwhile waging battle against a vengeful sultan and the tyranny of logic, packed frame to frame with special effects, mischievous wit, and colorful performances, including a young Sarah Polley as the Baron's no-nonsense sidekick. The Oscar-nominated Adventures from Baron Munchausen is a lavish exploration of the triumph of make-believe over reality. Now, this is a new 4K digital restoration approved by writer-director Terry Gilliam, 5.1 surround DTS HD master, and includes a 4K disc as well as a Blu-ray, and then a second Blu-ray with features. And, of course, a booklet essay. Essay by critic and author Michael Korensky. But let's go through the features on this disc. They are plentiful and enjoyable. The big one that I really dug is the Madness and Misadventures of Munchausen, which is a making-of documentary from 2008 by Konstantin Nasser, and it is a hour and 12-minute documentary featuring interviews with Terry Gilliam, co-writer Charles McKeown, Jonathan Pryce, actor Eric Idle, producer Thomas Shuley. Very fascinating dude. Doesn't come off well in the doc. Steve Abbott, executive producer at Prominent Features, the Python film company. David Picker, former president of Columbia Pictures. Production designer Dante Ferretti, first assistant director Lee Cleary, John Neville, the actor who plays Munchausen, casting director Marjorie Simkin, actress Sarah Polley, Robin Williams, Bill Patterson, who played Henry Salt, and the editor Peter Hollywood. And this is definitely a troubled production, and it is fascinating to hear the story of it. And I've heard Sarah Polley's recollections in recent years, and it sounds like an incredibly traumatic experience for her as a young girl. She's 8 at the time of this film. It sounds really rough, which is a bummer when you hear that a movie that you like had some trauma attached to it. And the documentary does not shy away from it, but it also does give context for what happened. And while I'm certainly disappointed in a filmmaker that I love in Terry Gilliam, and how he was, through whatever means, allowed an 8-year-old girl to feel not safe on the set. And ultimately, maybe she didn't express that enough to him at that time. But it does sort of set up why things were so crazy. And I think the beginnings of it start with shaky foundations, with producers not fully aligning and new somewhat unknown producers entering the picture and taking more control than they had initially envisioned. Producer Arnon Milchan, made a deal with Fox Studios, not telling Gilliam, and that cost the production money. And so the production was behind and over budget almost from day one. And once the production got out of control, then even more cooks entered the kitchen in the form of the Bond company that was insuring the film. It just became this nightmare. But I think part of the problem is that Arnon Milchan brought on this producer, Tom Shuley, who, again, is interviewed in the doc but does not come off well, and who I think just had some ideas that ultimately didn't benefit the film, one of which was going to Rome to shoot the movie. I think that ultimately really hurt the film, because Terry was sort of lured by this producer to go work in Italy under the auspices it would be cheaper to do it there, which it absolutely was not. It was incredibly more expensive to shoot in Italy, and there were all kinds of production problems because of that. Apparently, production in Italy is quite corrupt and filled with people looking to put as much money in their pocket as they can while, working on this production, and started to spiral out of control. And Terry goes into all the different problems they had, and it sounds like just an awful issue. Basically, they burned through the entire budget they had in the first 3 weeks of shooting, and horses and dogs got sick. The CEO, David Putnam, that shepherded the project was fired. Eric Idle is really great in this documentary because he's just very frank and honest about the difficulties and about his rightful cynicism about the film industry in general, which he said is 95% lying, awful people. And he says he has 2 rules in life. You must never be in a Stanley Kubrick film, and you must never be in a Terry Gilliam film. And he's like, I violated it. It was my fault. He just said, it was a truly horrible experience and one of the worst he's been through in his life. Sarah Polley, too, says she really wanted the part after an audition, and she remembered that her parents were so proud of her that she felt like they would never be as proud of her if she did anything else than be in this movie. Like if she'd gone to law school or whatever, this was the thing. And I think there was a pressure for her at that age to feel that she should take the part, despite it would turn out to be this incredibly traumatic experience. So she recalls like explosions going off near her head all the time in certain sequences, and having to be in freezing cold water for long periods, having to work ridiculously long days. It's tough. It's a tough story to hear, but it is, again, fascinating to hear how a production gets out of control. So that's the big, showpiece documentary. Then there's the astonishing and really true history of Baron Munchausen, which is about 17 minutes and 20 seconds. That's a video essay by David Cairns exploring the history of the Baron himself through his many literary, graphic, and cinematic representations. There is a special effects featurette, which is narrated by Terry Gilliam. This is a 2022 feature. The footage consists of pre-composite shots, computer imagery, and provides a behind-the-scenes look at the elaborate and varied special effects used by Peerless Camera Company to create the fantastical world of the film. Then we have storyboards for unfilmed scenes, which is Gilliam and co-writer Charles McKeown talking about the scenes that weren't filmed, and we see the storyboards. Then there's this whole section called Marketing Munchausen, which consists of 4 different pods, basically. There's one that's preview cards, which is Gilliam reading the cards from a couple October 1988 preview screenings. This is about 11 minutes and 50 seconds. Very enjoyable to hear Terry reading these cards. Taglines. This is 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Proposed taglines for the film from the marketing department, read by Terry Gilliam. And then Meet Baron Munchausen, which is a 4-minute, 16-second sort of archival featurette, which Terry hypes the movie between film clips. It's Terry in 1988 or whatever. And then there's a production featurette, standard fluffy sort of production featurette, 8 minutes. And another thing that's really great on this disc is this South Banks show, which I guess is a British show hosted by Melvin Bragg. And I thought it'd be like a talk show, but it's more intimate than that. This is a 1991 episode of the show. It's about 47 minutes long, and it traces Terry Gilliam's life and career from animator to film director to, the Python stuff. And it features Gilliam and actor and comedian Michael Palin and Baron Munchausen's dog. But it's a pretty neat portrait of Gilliam. It shows him in his home, and we see him with his kids and his workroom with lots of bits and pieces from his movies. And we see him shooting videos of his kids, and it's just a very enjoyable interview with him. And he talks about some of those production difficulties, but just a general, coming up of how he came to be the filmmaker we know. So that's a really neat inclusion, as well as the 1974 animated short film he did called Miracle Flight. About 5.5 minutes. It's, cutout animation, explores humankind's fascination with flight. Very silly, very enjoyable. But overall, just a very solid release from Criterion. And I absolutely enjoyed it. And so that is The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. And that will do it for this episode of the show. Hopefully there is some stuff here for you to check out. I should mention that Convoy Busters and Shanghai Joe are sold out at Diabolic DVD, but I believe there are still copies over at cauldronfilms.com. So if you are interested in those, I would snap them up sooner than later, as they will likely sell out. They are limited editions, and they come in these lovely side-loading sturdy cardboard slip cases. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.